When he laughed, the whole table joined him. Crystal glasses clinked, forks paused midair, and for a brief second, I forgot how to breathe. He wasn't just laughing. He was performing. My husband, Amir, the charming executive in his tailored Navy suit, was holding court in front of our so-called friends. And I was the punchline. And then she told the waiter she thought sautéed meant sweet, he said between laughs, wiping tears from the corner of his eye. Can you believe that? My wife thought she was ordering dessert. The table erupted again. Even the waiter smiled awkwardly as he poured wine into glasses that sparkled under the dim chandelier. I forced a smile, the kind that holds your face together when your heart wants to fall apart. The laughter around me felt sharp, echoing too long, too loud. The scent of truffle risotto and aged wine filled the air, but all I could taste was humiliation. Amir looked at me, still grinning. You remember that, right, love? He leaned back in his chair, his arm casually resting behind another woman's chair, his co-worker, Samira, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My throat tightened. I remember, I said quietly. And I did. Not the way he told it, but the way I lived it. It wasn't a funny story. It was our first anniversary trip, a small Italian restaurant I'd spent weeks saving for. I had mixed up one word on the menu, and he'd laughed gently back then. Or so I thought. Now, 2 years later, that tiny mistake had turned into his favorite dinner party joke, the one he told to remind everyone that I wasn't as sophisticated as his new circle. I looked around the table. Polished people, polished laughter, polished lies. Samira touched his wrist lightly, giggling. You're terrible, Amir, she said. He smiled, pretending to protest. What? I'm just sharing memories. I caught the flicker in her eyes. Admiration, amusement, maybe something more. I looked down at my plate, the gold-rimmed edge blurring through my tears. My palms were damp under the table. For the rest of the dinner, I said little. I watched him. The way he leaned in when others spoke. The way he soaked up praise like sunlight. He belonged here, among the confident, the powerful, the ones who never hesitated before speaking. And I was shrinking. By dessert, I had disappeared completely. When we got home, the silence was heavier than the laughter had been. He loosened his tie, tossed his keys on the counter, and said casually, You were awfully quiet tonight. I didn't realize my embarrassment was meant to be entertainment, I said softly. He turned to me, frowning slightly. Oh, come on, Layla. Don't be dramatic. It was just a joke. A joke? I repeated. You mocked me in front of your colleagues. You made me small. He exhaled, shaking his head. You take things too seriously. That's your problem. Everyone laughed. They know it's harmless. Everyone laughed, I said, except me. For a second, his eyes hardened, just a flicker, before he smiled again. You really need to lighten up if you want to fit in with my friends. There it was again, my friends, not ours. He poured himself a drink, turned on the TV, and the conversation ended there, like so many others. I went to the bedroom, undid my earrings, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked foreign, too quiet, too polite, too small. But deep inside, something stirred. Not anger, not yet. Just awakening. Back then, I thought that night was just a bad memory. I didn't know it was the beginning of the unraveling, a slow, delicate tearing of every thread I had woven into our marriage. But before I tell you how it broke, how I broke, I need to tell you how it began. Because to understand the silence of that dinner, you have to know the laughter that came before it. When Amir and I first met, I used to think the world grew, quieter around him, as if even the air paused to listen when he spoke. He was confident without trying, charming without effort. We met at a friend's engagement dinner. I was pouring tea when he joked about how the kettle always whistles louder when it's shy. It was a silly line, but it made me laugh. And he noticed that laugh. From that evening on, he called me Shy Kettle. It was ridiculous and sweet, the kind of nickname that makes your heart warm in the beginning and ache later on. We married within a year. Our first apartment was small, barely enough space for the two of us and our mismatched furniture. But I loved it. I loved our chaos, our burnt toasts, our late-night talks about dreams. He wanted to start a business someday. I wanted to write a cookbook, not because I was a chef, but because I loved stories told through food. He'd tease me. "You'll write the recipes, I'll fund the empire." Back then, the word empire made us both laugh. Our mornings began with jasmine tea and quiet. He'd hum while ironing his shirts. I'd sit by the window, scrolling through recipes I'd never try. Life was ordinary, and that was enough. But ordinary doesn't last when ambition outgrows tenderness. When Amir got promoted, things shifted. The laughter that once brought us together started feeling calculated. He started dining with important people, people I didn't know. People who made me feel like I had to rehearse my sentences. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive cologne and confidence. He'd say things like, "You should learn more about wine. It's embarrassing when you ask if Merlot comes in white." I'd laugh it off, but the words would sting later, when I was washing dishes or folding laundry, wondering when my husband stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a project. Sometimes I'd wait up for him, dinner cold on the table. He'd kiss my forehead absently and say, "You shouldn't have waited. You know how work is." And I did know, or at least I thought I did. I knew the tone he used when he spoke to me was different from the one he used on the phone. Softer, more careful. I told myself I was imagining it, because love makes you protect the person who hurts you, especially when you don't want to admit they're changing. Still, there were moments of light. On weekends, he'd make pancakes and hum old songs. We'd sit on the balcony, sharing coffee, pretending nothing was wrong. He'd say, "You're my calm, Layla." And I'd smile, thinking it was love, not realizing it was convenience. The night of that luxury dinner. It didn't happen out of nowhere. It was just the first time he didn't bother hiding his contempt. The first time he mocked me publicly for being myself, for not fitting into the world he'd started chasing. And the first time, I stopped laughing along. That night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I sat by the window and stared at the city lights. They looked like tiny stars caught in glass, beautiful, distant, unreachable. I remember whispering to myself, "One day I won't need anyone to explain me." I didn't know what that meant then, but I meant it. Before the dinners and the whispers, before the pitying looks from people who once admired us, there was a time I believed I had everything I'd ever prayed for. We lived in a modest apartment near Clifton, 2 bedrooms, one with a balcony that looked over a noisy street. The sound of vendors calling out every morning used to wake me before my alarm. I'd roll over, pull the thin curtain aside, and watch the world come alive. Fruit carts, the smell of parathas from the corner stall, the faint cry of a seagull somewhere far above. That was my peace. That, and Amir's voice humming from the shower. "Layla," he'd call out through the running water. "Have you seen my blue tie? The one I ironed last night?" I'd reply, sipping tea at the table. "Check behind the door. It's probably still hanging." He'd emerge moments later, smelling like soap and coffee, his hair still damp, his smile easy. That was Amir, always in motion, always certain of where he was going. And I was happy just being the stillness beside him. Our life was simple, stitched together by small rituals. Friday nights meant cooking something new, usually me failing at an experimental recipe and him pretending it was perfect. "I swear this is better than the restaurant," he'd say, struggling to swallow another bite of my overly spiced biryani. I'd laugh until my stomach hurt. "Liar." Hopeless cook, he'd tease back. Kissing the top of my head, we'd fall asleep that way, in laughter, not perfection. Sometimes, when the power would go out, as it always did in our part of the city, we'd light candles, sit by the window and tell stories about our childhoods. He'd talk about how he used to race his brother on bicycles down the hill, always cheating by pushing him just before the finish line. I'd tell him about how I once stole mangoes from our neighbor's tree and hid them in my school bag for days until they spoiled. He'd laugh, saying, "You? The sweet, obedient Layla? A mango thief?" I'd grin. "You'd be surprised what I'm capable of." He never knew how true that sentence would become. When Amir's promotion came, it felt like our victory. He came home one evening, eyes bright, holding a bottle of champagne I didn't even know we owned. "I got it," he said, breathless. "Regional director. Can you believe it?" I screamed. I really did. The kind of pure joy that doesn't pause to think about what comes next. We danced in the kitchen, barefoot, champagne spilling onto the tiles. That night, he looked at me and said, "I couldn't have done it without you." "You're my luck," I believed him. Every word. The new job brought changes, a bigger paycheck, a sleeker car, dinners with people who wore watches that cost more than our rent. Amir started buying things, suits, cufflinks, a gold pen he said made him feel the part. At first, I admired his drive. He was finally living his dream, and I was proud to stand beside him. But little things began to shift. Our dinners turned quieter. He'd scroll through emails during meals, responding with one-word replies to my questions. "How was your meeting?" "Good. Did you eat?" "Yeah." He was present, but not really there, and when he was home, he seemed restless, like the walls of our apartment had suddenly grown too small for him. One evening, as I arranged flowers on the dining table, he came up behind me and said, "Layla, do you ever think about upgrading?" "Upgrading?" I smiled. "You mean the car?" "No," he said. "Everything. The house, the neighborhood, the people we surround ourselves with. Don't you want more?" I turned to face him. "I'm happy here." "Aren't you?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked around the room. The chipped paint, the worn sofa, the curtains I'd sewn myself. Finally, he said, "It's fine for now. But you'll see. There's a whole different world out there." That night, for the first time, I felt small standing next to him, as if my happiness had become an obstacle he needed to outgrow. A few months later, we moved into a new apartment uptown. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen that gleamed like a showroom. I should have been happy, and I was for a while. But the laughter that used to echo in our old kitchen didn't follow us here. The silence was colder in bigger rooms. Amir started working longer hours. His colleagues, mostly young, ambitious, and charming, began visiting often. I tried to fit in, cooking elaborate dinners, smiling through conversations I didn't fully understand. One night after everyone left, Amir said, "You should read more about business, you know. It'll help you keep up." I laughed nervously. I didn't realize I was falling behind. He smiled faintly, but his tone was serious. "Just saying. People notice when someone's out of place." Out of place. The words settled heavy in my chest. That night, while cleaning the dishes, I stared at my reflection in the window. Behind me, the city lights blurred, gold, white, and distant. And I wondered when I'd started needing to keep up with the man who once said I was his luck. There were good days, of course. There always are, that's how you stay. Days when he'd bring me flowers, or we'd share jokes over breakfast. Days when he'd take my hand at parties, smile, and whisper, "You look beautiful tonight." But even those moments began to feel rehearsed, gestures done out of memory, not love. I'd tell myself I was being ungrateful, that maybe success just made people busier, not colder. But deep down, I missed the man who used to hold my hand for no reason at all. Then came the first sign, small, almost invisible, but enough to plant a seed of unease. It was a Sunday afternoon. He'd gone out for a work meeting, leaving his laptop open on the desk. I wasn't looking for anything, I was just cleaning. But as I wiped the keyboard, a notification popped up. It was a message from a name I recognized, Samira Q. She was part of his new team. The message read, "You always know how to make people laugh. Amir, I don't know how you do it." A smiley face followed. Then another message, "You made my weekend better." I froze. My hands trembled over the keyboard, but I didn't scroll. I couldn't, because I knew. Once you start looking for proof, you'll find it. And once you find it, nothing is ever the same again. So I closed the laptop, and I waited. When he came home, I asked him how his meeting went. He said, "Good, productive." I nodded. "With Samira?" He looked at me, startled, just for a moment. Then he smiled. "Yeah, how'd you know?" "You mentioned her before?" I lied. He poured himself water, his movements too casual. "She's smart." "You'd like her," I smiled faintly. "I'm sure I would." That night he fell asleep easily, his breathing slow and steady beside me. I stared at the ceiling, tracing patterns in the shadows. The scent of his cologne still lingered in the air. Warm, confident, unbothered. And I lay there, wide awake, realizing something had shifted, not just between us, but inside me. It wasn't jealousy. It was awareness. The quiet kind that doesn't scream but sits heavy in your chest. Waiting. I told myself I was overthinking. That maybe I'd misunderstood. That love doesn't just fade, not without reason. But deep down, a whisper had begun. A voice I tried to silence. "He's not laughing with you anymore, Layla. He's laughing at you." The next morning, Amir kissed my cheek before leaving for work. His lips were soft, routine. And for the first time, I didn't kiss him back. I just smiled and said, "Have a good day." It was small, that moment, almost invisible. But looking back now, I know that's the day my heart started to prepare for goodbye. People think betrayal starts with a lie. It doesn't. It starts with silence, the quiet kind that sits between words, heavier than noise. After that night when I saw Samira's message, I told myself it meant nothing. People flirt, people joke. It doesn't always mean something darker. But something in Amir's tone, in his eyes when he said her name, began to change how I heard everything he said after that, and how I heard what he didn't say. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I first noticed the small things. He came home later than usual, humming to himself. He didn't even notice the food I had set out, still warm on the table. "Big day?" I asked. "Mm-hmm," he said, distracted, loosening his tie. "Long day, but good." We closed the deal with the Dubai team. He opened the fridge, took out a bottle of sparkling water, and leaned against the counter as he scrolled through his phone. There was a faint smile tugging at his lips, not the usual polite one he gave me. It looked private, soft, familiar in a way that didn't belong to me anymore. "Something funny?" I asked. He looked up. "Huh?" "Oh, no, just a meme from a friend." He put the phone down face first on the counter. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Good for you, but I noticed he didn't eat that night." He said he wasn't hungry, that he'd grabbed a bite at the office. When I cleaned up, I found a faint lipstick stain on his water glass. It wasn't mine. I stared at it, a thin coral line, my breath catching in my throat. It could have been anything, I told myself. Maybe the glass was unwashed. Maybe it was from before. Maybe I was imagining things, but deep down, my heart whispered what my mind wouldn't. You already know. The next few weeks were filled with small, invisible betrayals. Missed dinners. Canceled plans. "Just meetings, Layla, don't wait up." He used to text me when he was running late. Now, hours passed in silence. And when I called, he'd answer with that same casual calm that used to make me feel safe, but now felt like a wall. "I told you I'm busy," he'd say. "You worry too much." One evening, when he came home, his shirt smelled faintly of jasmine, not the cologne he usually wore. I recognized that scent instantly. It wasn't mine. It was the same perfume Samira wore the night I met her at one of his office gatherings. I didn't confront him, not yet. Something inside me refused to beg for truth I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I watched. quietly. Because sometimes silence is the only power you have left when your heart starts to break. Days passed like that. Him drifting further, me pretending not to notice. Until one night, I decided to visit him at the office. He had told me he'd be working late on a new presentation, and I thought, foolishly, that maybe he'd be happy to see me. I packed dinner for him, biryani, his favorite, and took a cab downtown. When I reached the building, the security guard recognized me immediately. "Good evening, ma'am. Working late again?" he said with a smile. "Yes," I lied. "Just bringing something for Amir." He nodded. "He's upstairs, conference room B." I took the elevator up. The doors opened to the faint hum of computers, the soft glow of screens left on. The air smelled of coffee and carpet cleaner. As I walked down the corridor, I heard laughter, low, intimate. A woman's voice. Then his eye froze outside the glass conference room door. Through the reflection, I saw them, Amir and Samira, sitting close, a single laptop open between them. Her hand was on his wrist. His head was tilted toward her, smiling in that same unguarded way he used to smile at me. Nothing about the moment was scandalous, not on the surface. But I knew that look. It was the look of two people who had forgotten the world existed outside that room. My throat tightened. I turned before either of them saw me. The biryani box trembled in my hands. By the time I reached the elevator, tears had blurred my vision. I pressed the button again and again, whispering, "Don't cry here, not here." When I reached the lobby, the guard called out, "Ma'am, you forgot." I didn't turn back. I just walked out into the cold night, leaving the dinner, and a small part of my heart, behind. When I got home, I placed my phone on the table and stared at the dark window. My reflection looked strange, quiet, too composed, like a woman watching her own life from the outside. A part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to call him and demand the truth. But another part, the deeper one, whispered, "Wait." So I waited. And I listened. The next morning, Amir walked in humming again. He kissed my forehead like nothing was wrong. "Sorry I got in late," he said, pouring coffee. "We had to prep for the Dubai review." "You wouldn't believe how demanding they are." I smiled faintly. "I stopped by the office last night." He froze mid-sip. "You, what?" "I brought you dinner," I said evenly. "But you were busy." "With Samira." His face changed, not guilt, not shock. Just calculation? Like he was rearranging his story before speaking. "Oh, that?" He laughed, the sound forced. "Come on, Layla, we were working." "You know how these projects go." "I know," I said softly. "It's just the way you were smiling. I haven't seen you smile like that in a long time." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I thought I saw something like regret. But it passed too quickly. "You're overthinking," he said finally. "You've always been too sensitive." He left for work soon after, and I stood there, coffee growing cold in my hand, realizing something cruel. When a man starts defending his behavior instead of your feelings, it's already over. That evening, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The food had gone cold again. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Steady, unbothered, beautiful, I remember whispering. He's slipping away, not in anger, but in grief, like watching the tide take something you can't swim fast enough to save. I wanted to believe there was still hope, that maybe he'd come back to me. But deep down, I knew. The man who once held my hand through storms now laughed in boardrooms with someone who admired his shine. And the woman he used to love had become invisible. A week later, we attended another work dinner. It was smaller, more intimate. Just a few executives and their partners. I wore a soft blue dress Amir had bought me on our second anniversary. When I walked out, he barely glanced up from his phone. "You ready?" His tone was flat, distracted. But I pretended not to notice. During the dinner, I tried to engage, to smile, to keep up with the conversations about business mergers and investments I didn't understand. But Amir didn't look at me once. He laughed at Samira's jokes, complimented her insights, poured her wine when her glass was empty. I watched, silent, smiling through the ache. At one point, the waiter asked if we were celebrating anything special. Before I could answer, Amir laughed and said, "Celebrating patience." "My wife has mastered the art," the table chuckled, and I smiled. But inside something cracked, clean, irreversible. A soundless shatter that only I could hear. When we got home, he went straight to bed. I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the shadows moving across the walls. I realized I had spent months trying to hold together a man who had already let go. I whispered to myself, "If love makes you smaller, it's not love anymore." And for the first time, I began to imagine a life where I wasn't the quiet woman beside someone else's success, but the woman who built something of her own. People say the truth sets you free, but before it does, it burns everything in its path. The night I found out, really found out, wasn't dramatic. No storm, no raised voices, just stillness, the kind that makes your heart listen harder than your ears. It was late March. The air had that quiet chill before the summer heat sets in. Amir had been distant for weeks. He left earlier, came home later, always with some new excuse. Meetings, clients, strategy dinners. I'd stopped asking. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's survival. That evening, he'd told me he was traveling for a short business retreat. 2 nights. Nothing big. He packed lightly, a few shirts, his laptop bag, and a cologne he hadn't worn in months. "Want me to drop you at the airport?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual. He smiled, that soft, practiced smile. "No need. The company car's coming." He kissed my forehead, said, "Don't wait up," and walked out. The door clicked shut. The house exhaled with me. For a long while, I just stood there, watching the empty hallway, the stillness he left behind. And then, something inside me, quiet but insistent, said, "Check." I don't know what pushed me that night. Maybe intuition, maybe exhaustion, maybe that whisper of a woman's instinct that never really lies. I went into his study. His desk was always spotless. He liked things orderly, predictable. But the drawer wasn't fully closed. Inside were his travel documents, his passport, and a printed itinerary. I picked it up. The company logo was there, yes, but the destination made my stomach drop. It wasn't the city he'd told me. Not even the same country. I checked again. No mistake. He wasn't going where he said he was. My hands trembled as I read the details. 2 guests, deluxe suite, reservation confirmed. 2. The room tilted. My body went cold first, then hot all at once. I sank into the chair, staring at the paper as if it might rewrite itself if I blinked long enough. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. There always is in the beginning, at least the one you tell yourself so you don't fall apart. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe his assistant handled the booking. Maybe 2 guests meant something else. But my heart whispered what my mind refused to. You already know who the second name will be, and I was right. When I flipped the second page, there it was. Guest, Ms. Samira Qureshi. The world went silent. For a long time, I just stared at her name, tracing each letter with my finger as if touching it would make it less real. But it was real. It was all real. I don't remember how long I sat there. The paper crumpled in my hands, my breath shallow. The clock ticked softly in the background. The jasmine candle on the table had burned halfway down, its scent heavy in the room. When I finally moved, I wasn't crying. There were no tears left. Just this strange, hollow calm, like my body knew something my heart hadn't caught up to yet. I folded the itinerary neatly, put it back in the drawer, and closed it. Then I turned off the light. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. Every moment between us replayed in fragments. Laughter, shared dreams, the quiet nights, the broken ones. All of it, crumbling now under the weight of one name. The next morning, I called his office. His secretary answered, cheerful as always. Mr. Amir left early for the retreat, she said. He should be back Sunday evening. I smiled tightly. Right, thank you. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my cousin, Nadia. She worked for an airline, discreet, reliable. I asked her to check the flight manifest for Amir's name. She hesitated, but agreed. When she called back an hour later, her voice was different, careful, gentle. He's not on the flight to Singapore, Layla, she said. But there's a record of him flying to Istanbul, with someone named Samira Qureshi. My hand went numb around the phone. She whispered, I'm so sorry. I hung up quietly. That was all I needed. No confrontation, no yelling. Just confirmation, the kind that leaves no room for doubt, no space for forgiveness. I spent the next 2 days in a strange fog. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't cry. Didn't sleep. I cooked dinner for one. Folded his clothes out of habit. Pretended the house wasn't echoing in his absence. Grief does that. It makes you move through routines as if pretending will delay the collapse. But at night, I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights. And slowly, a different feeling began to stir. Not rage, not revenge. Something quieter, stronger. Resolve. On the third day, he came home. Smiling, tan, smelling of her perfume. Miss me? He said, dropping his bag near the couch. He wrapped his arms around me, kissed my cheek. Too easily, too smoothly. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, really looked. His eyes were bright, his posture relaxed. He didn't look like a man burdened by guilt. He looked satisfied. How was the retreat? I asked softly. Productive, he said. You'd have been bored. Same old presentations and dinners. I nodded. I'm sure. He didn't notice the way my hand trembled slightly as I took his jacket. Didn't notice the quiet in my voice, the stillness in my eyes. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not that he lied, but that he didn't think I'd ever see through it. That night, I waited until he fell asleep. Then I got up, went to the study, and opened the drawer again. The itinerary was gone, replaced neatly with another. A new trip next month. Same destination, same second name. I stared at it for a long time. Then I took out my phone and took a picture. When I slipped back into bed, the air between us felt heavier than ever. His back was turned. The distance between our bodies could have been miles, and for the first time, I didn't reach out. In the days that followed, I started observing him, not as a wife but as a witness, the calls he took outside, the messages he smiled at, the new cologne, the sudden gym membership, the way he'd hum to himself before leaving for meetings. Every detail was another thread pulling at the truth. And I kept quiet, collecting them like evidence for a crime that would never go to court. A week later, we were invited to another company dinner. That night, the one where he mocked our marriage, was supposed to be a celebration of the firm's new project. He insisted I come. Everyone's bringing their partners, he said. You should look your best, so I did. I wore a black silk dress, understated but graceful. He looked proud walking beside me, not because I was his wife, but because I completed the picture he wanted people to see. The dinner was at a luxury hotel. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, laughter spilling like champagne bubbles. Samira was there too, glowing, confident, her hand brushing his arm in small, careless ways that spoke volumes. People noticed. They always do, but they look away when it's convenient. And then came the moment. The joke. The mockery. The story he told about me confusing sauté for sweet. The laughter. The sting. It wasn't just a joke. It was a declaration that he'd outgrown me, that I was now the punchline to the story of his rise. And as they laughed, something inside me clicked. Not shattered, clicked. Like a lock turning, a door opening, I smiled quietly. Because in that exact moment, I stopped being his reflection and started becoming my own person again. That night when we got home, he fell asleep easily, oblivious. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. The same voice that had once whispered, "Wait," now said something different. "Leave." Not in anger, but in truth. Because love that humiliates you in public is not love, it's ownership. And I was done being owned. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase. Just the essentials: clothes, my journal, a few photos. He was still asleep when I left. The sun was just rising, soft light spilling across the balcony. I paused at the door, looking back one last time. The house looked beautiful, but cold, like a stage after the final act. I whispered, "Goodbye, Amir." And I walked out, barefoot, steady, free. When you walk away from something that's breaking you, the silence that follows isn't peace. Not right away. It's hollow. It echoes. It reminds you of everything you once begged to hold on to. That's what those first few weeks felt like standing in an empty room filled with ghosts. I moved into a small apartment at the edge of the city, 1 bedroom, tiny balcony, secondhand furniture. After years of living in glass and marble, it felt strange, almost humiliating at first. But it was mine. Every square inch. No shadows. No performance. The first night, I sat on the floor with takeout noodles and one flickering lamp. I remember whispering to myself, "This is where it begins." Not loudly, not confidently, just enough to hear it out loud. Because sometimes healing starts as a whisper. The mornings were the hardest. Waking up alone, making 1 cup of tea instead of 2. Checking my phone out of habit, expecting a message that never came. He didn't call. Didn't ask where I'd gone. Didn't even pretend to care. That silence was confirmation. I hadn't left him. He'd already left me, long before I walked out the door, so I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. And I started writing. Every morning, I'd sit by the window with a notebook. At first, it was letters I'd never send, things I wished I'd said, questions I'd never asked. Then it turned into ideas, thoughts, observations, about love, loss, and the lies we tell ourselves to survive. And slowly, without meaning to, I began writing stories. One evening, I was scrolling through my old social media when I saw a post from an old college friend. She'd started a small online blog about relationships and women's resilience. Her words were raw, honest, unpolished. But they had something I hadn't seen in a long time: truth. I reached out to her. We talked for hours about betrayal, about starting over, about how every heartbreak can become a new language if you're brave enough to speak it. She invited me to write something for her blog. "Just one post," she said. "Write what you wish someone had told you." So I did. The piece was titled, "The Woman Who Walked Away from a Joke." I didn't use real names, but every word was mine. The dinner, the laughter, the silence, the moment I chose to leave. I hit publish at 2 a.m., thinking no one would care. By morning, it had 5,000 views. By night, 50,000. By the end of the week, 500,000. The comments section was full of women. Mothers, wives, daughters, all saying the same thing in different words. "You just told my story. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for giving it a name." I cried reading those comments. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. That one article became the seed. I kept writing about healing, boundaries, rediscovering self-worth. The stories spread faster than I could keep up with. People started asking if I did workshops, if I could speak at events, if I could teach them how to rebuild after betrayal. I wasn't ready for all that. But I said yes anyway. Because sometimes saying yes before you're ready is how you grow into the person you need to be. Meanwhile, Amir's world kept spinning. Through mutual friends, I heard about his promotions, his fancy trips, his public appearances with Samira. They became the golden couple everyone admired, sleek, successful, flawless. It stung at first, seeing the life I helped him build, the one he used to mock me from. But here's what I learned. Jealousy is just grief wearing a different outfit. When I stopped comparing our lives, I realized mine was finally starting to feel real, raw, imperfect. But mine. A few months later, I received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership conference. It was small, community level, 50 attendees at most. But I remember standing backstage, my palms sweating, knees trembling, thinking, what if I have nothing worth saying? And then I remembered that night at the dinner. The laughter, the humiliation, the way I'd felt so small. And I thought, if my story can stop even one woman from feeling that way, it's worth it. So I walked out on stage, and for 20 minutes, I spoke the truth. About love that belittles you, about walking away, about rebuilding from the ashes of someone else's ego. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a woman stood up and started clapping. Then another. And another. That sound, soft, rising, unstoppable, was the sound of my new life beginning. The conference posted my speech online. It went viral. Millions of views within weeks. People started calling me the woman who turned heartbreak into a brand. At first, I hated that label. But then I realized, maybe it wasn't wrong. I launched my own platform, Second Bloom. A space for women to share their stories of starting over, not as victims, but as visionaries of their next chapter. What began as a blog became a full company, workshops, online courses, coaching sessions. Within 2 years, we had offices in 3 cities. I hired other women like me, the ones who'd been underestimated, silenced, laughed at. We built something powerful together, not out of bitterness, but out of belief that no woman should ever have to rebuild alone. And then, one evening, almost 3 years after I walked out, I saw him again. It was at a charity gala. I'd been invited as a keynote speaker. He was there representing his company. When our eyes met across the room, time didn't stop. It clarified. He looked older, still polished, still confident, but something behind his smile had dimmed. Samira wasn't with him. I'd heard they'd separated months ago. He approached me slowly. "Layla," he said, his voice cautious. "You look different." "I am," I replied, smiling. We stood there for a long moment, 2 people who once knew each other's every silence. He glanced at the banner behind me. Second Bloom, from broken to boundless. And then back at me, eyes soft with something between regret and pride. "I heard about what you've built," he said. "You've done incredible things," I nodded. "Thank you," he hesitated. "I didn't realize, back then, what I was destroying." "I know," I said simply. "But that's the thing about breaking something. Sometimes it grows back stronger without you." He smiled faintly. "You always did have the last word." I looked him in the eye. "Not the last, just the right one." When I left that night, the air outside was cool, crisp, the kind that carries both closure and freedom. As I walked toward my car, a young woman stopped me. She looked nervous, holding a notebook. "Ms. Layla," she said softly, "your speech last year, it made me leave a relationship I thought I couldn't survive. And now I'm starting my own business." Her voice shook. "I just wanted to say thank you." I took her hands in mine and smiled. "You did that for yourself," I told her. "You just needed to remember who you were before someone made you forget." She nodded, tears in her eyes. And as I watched her walk away, I realized that was the moment I'd been waiting for all along. Not revenge, not validation, but impact. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming so whole that their opinion no longer defines you. I went home that night and sat on my balcony. Same city, different skyline, new life. The stars were faint, but I could see them. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I wasn't the woman who was mocked at dinner anymore. I wasn't even the one who walked away. I was the woman who rose. Would you have forgiven them? Or walked away like I did? Either way, I hope you choose peace, because peace will always love you back. If my story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me for more stories about love, loss, and finding strength again. Because sometimes healing begins with just one story.